You've come to the right place. It's a webinar today brought to you by Auckland Branch, Construction Procurement Post-COVID-19, a New Zealand perspective. Settle in, get ready, it's going to be a ripper today. And make sure, as per usual on CIPS webinars, we want to hear from you. So get on the comments chat line and make sure that you pick up all panellists and all attendees and tell us where you're from. We're really keen to hear where everybody's from today. We get people from all over the world, so do tell us. Just grab all panellists and all attendees when you tell us. You've come to the right place. It's the webinar, CIPS Auckland Branch webinar on the topic of construction procurement post-COVID-19. Kia ora. Many comments already coming in. Welcome from India. Welcome to our CIPS Auckland Branch webinar on the topic of construction procurement post-COVID-19. Please keep commenting on the chat bar and pick up all attendees and all panellists and tell us where you're from. We're delighted to have everybody on board today. I'd also like to advise everyone that this webinar is currently being recorded and will be made available to all attendees next week. But let's get underway. Tēnā koukou, tēnā koukou, tēnā koukou katoa. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many lands on which we meet today. I actually join you from lockdown in Melbourne, and I join you from the land belonging to the Wurundjeri Woi, Wurrung and Burrung people of the Kulin Nations. I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present. We have over 250 registered attendees today, so glad to have you all joining us. And my name's Sharon Morris, and I'm delighted to be welcoming you and representing the professional body as GM for Australia and New Zealand CIPS. For those who don't know the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply, or CIPS, we're your global professional body for procurement and supply professionals. And not only are we dedicated to promoting best practice and continuous improvement in professional standards, but we're also dedicated to raising awareness of the contribution that procurement and supply management can make to organisations and in fact the community at large. We're really here to support you, that is procurement professionals, through your procurement professional journey. And with that support comes knowledge. And today's webinar is just one of those ways that we're sharing the knowledge. But CIPS is also your gateway to connections, and that's about networking, but it's really about being part of the procurement and supply community. And now, more than ever, do we need to remain connected. So I encourage you to join the conversations on our LinkedIn groups or seek out branch events. In fact, the Auckland Committee have their monthly networking tonight at the Brit Pub and Eatery, but I'll tell you more about that at the end of the session today. Allow me first to introduce you to the chair of the CIPS Auckland Branch Committee and our host for today's webinar, Adi Dye. For those who don't know, Adi, like members of the CIPS branch committees across our region, is a CIPS volunteer, and we couldn't do what we do without their valuable contribution. So Adi, many thanks, and over to you.
Thank you, Sharon. As mentioned, my name is Adi Dye, and I'm the Auckland Branch Chair. Kia ora katoa, everyone. Welcome to our second webinar. I'm thrilled to have over 200 people internationally register for today's webinar session. We'll start with just a few housekeeping notices. All attendees have had their mics muted during this presentation. However, we do ask that you utilise the questions and answers chat box to write any comments you might have, and share any questions at the end with the panelist members. If you have any specific questions, you may want to address them directly to any one of our panelists, but please enter them again in the Q&A chat box, and we'll attend to your questions directly at the end. Now about today's webinar. The purpose of today's webinar event is to bring together the subject matter experts. Our speakers include Peter Cunningham, who's an MCIPS member. He's a Senior Strategic Procurement Manager at the Ministry of Education. He'll be sharing his experience educating and promoting the awareness of the current construction procurement environment in New Zealand. However, the learnings can be used globally. The second speaker we have is Benoit Midol. He is the General Manager down in New Zealand, who will also be sharing his learnings and expertise that he brings to the construction market post-COVID-19 and the opportunities relating to procurement. So I'd like to introduce Peter Cunningham. Peter is committed to the construction industry change and reform for over 2 decades. He has a wealth of knowledge and government experience that helps to improve the performance of the sector, and he values the clients that obtain from the construction procurement expertise that he provides. He provides strategic procurement and commercial advice, along with support and specializing in the delivery of construction programs, working with the government, construction clients, supply chain organizations to develop, implement, and manage procurement and contracting strategies that focus on delivering value for money outcomes. Peter currently works with the Ministry of Education on their current construction program and delivery, and also on Auckland Council and their waste collection contracts. I will invite our first speaker, Peter, to present his learnings.
Thanks, Adi. Thanks for the introduction, and thanks also to the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply for the opportunity to talk to their membership all over the world today. So thanks for that. Just checking that everyone can, well, hoping everyone can hear me, but so just a bit of background on the opportunity that the Ministry of Education has in front of it over the next decade. Just for some context, we have a $12 billion New Zealand dollar program to deliver by 2030. And as you can see, it ramps up significantly over the next couple of years and stays at around 1.2 billion a year for the next 7 years or so. So we've got quite a significant challenge ahead of us, which we had COVID put a bit of a spanner in the works for us there, but we've been responding to that and planning this program alongside our response to that, the COVID situation. So next slide, please. So from our perspective, COVID put a spotlight on a few things, not just from a Ministry of Education perspective, but right across the construction sector. So what we found was that there's a very traditional approach to procurement in the construction market, which usually ultimately drives a race to the bottom, as the sector calls it, where we have a lot of price competition. So what our view from that is that we need to start moving more into a negotiated works environment. Risk allocation is typically shifted to suppliers, so which really needs to have a more balanced view on appropriate risk sharing. Where risk is shared, where it's apportioned to where it can be best managed. A big challenge for us at the Ministry is getting our forward work program and visibility. We've just actually published our latest version of our forward work pipeline to our construction directory suppliers earlier today. And we've just had a supply briefing as well this morning, talking through our northern region opportunities. So this is something that's a real focus area for us. But if we can't articulate the opportunity to our suppliers around projects that we have coming up, then it becomes very challenging for us to manage our procurement successfully. Which leads me into the next point around capability and resources. So if we're moving into different environments, away from the race to the bottom and into more negotiated works, that needs a different style of procurement. It needs different capabilities and it needs different resources. So we need to address that inside our organisation, but we also need to address it with our suppliers as well. So if we've got suppliers that have got normalised behaviour through competitive tendering and price competition, then they need to be also brought on the journey with us around how we want to negotiate more works, focus on value outcomes, and work with us in a different type of environment. So we've got a misunderstanding as well around project costs and risk drivers. So what we really need to do there is to move away from that and to focus on the most appropriate contract delivery model and procurement that fits the project and the outcome that we're looking for. I've got a section here around contracts. Ministry has done quite a lot of work around contracts over the last year or so, which has got good feedback from the market here in New Zealand. But I think the main point here is to move towards an environment where we're using standard contract forms without huge amounts of change. What we find is that we have a lot of unproductive time spent by both our suppliers and ourselves working through changes to standard forms of contracts. So that's something, another area that needs to be worked on as well. COVID obviously created a number of different challenges for us over the last 8 or 9 months. But one thing it has done for everyone, I think, is increased volatility in the supply market. And we've seen one contractor go into receivership here, or more than one contractor go into receivership here in New Zealand. But that puts the spotlight back on to the clients and what financial due diligence and what additional risk we're prepared to take on board in managing financial risk during this COVID, post-COVID, or during COVID in some parts of the world. And for New Zealand, we're fortunate that we haven't had any community transmission for over 100 days now. So we've got a relatively normal environment here. So we talk about post-COVID, but yeah, just addressing those additional financial due diligence issues. And I'd say that in the vertical sector, which is in buildings, construction in buildings, we tend to have a lack of collaborative working practices that you might see elsewhere in the construction industry, and Benoit may touch on this in his presentation in the horizontal sector, which is roads and roads and everything beneath it, where there's a lot of collaborative working practices, and there's been quite a lot of consolidation in the market. A lot of those collaborative working practices in New Zealand have been led by our transport agency, and the great work that they've been doing over the last 15 to 20 years. And the final thing I'll just make a note on is that procurement, especially in our organisation, is taking way too long. So how can we shorten those timeframes? What can we be doing to make our process more efficient? Next slide, please. So our response to COVID, going right back to when we went into alert level 4 lockdown, has been a proactive response. We felt as though we had no other choice to do that. We had obviously live procurement activity that was in process, and also we were negotiating contracts and had live projects. We set up specific web pages of COVID-19 content. And also intranet guidance for internal staff around how to manage contracts and live construction projects during that initial alert level 4 lockdown. We set up a couple of email addresses, which you'll see here in the next couple of bullet points. Those were really basically as a single point of contact, really, that if anyone that was in a procurement process that wanted to ask any questions about the process they were in, it gave them the opportunity to contact us directly to seek clarification around how we were proceeding with our procurement activity during the alert level 4 lockdown. And likewise now, this COVID-19 variations email addresses is a very much live email address, as we're still working with our suppliers around variations during the COVID-19 lockdowns. We did have a reasonably progressive approach towards progressing our procurement activities during the lockdown. We used technology a lot to both progress both procurements and also negotiations. We even did market briefings via Zoom during the lockdown, and that was well received by the market, that we actually progressed things rather than stalling things or just shutting things down completely until we were able to have face-to-face meetings again. The variations process is ongoing, and the key thing for us there was that we saw that through payment through into the supply chain. So it wasn't just staying with the lead contractor that we contract with it. We wanted to see the visibility going through to make sure that the rest of the supply chain was being paid as well. And our focus there was mainly on, obviously, a key thing being the industry well-being, of which cash flow is a key component of that. The Ministry itself is a keen supporter of the Construction Sector Accord and is fully engaged in the activity of the Accord. This is a joint industry government improvement initiative in New Zealand, which over the Alert Level 4 lockdown developed a rapid mobilisation playbook. This was really about how agencies or clients in general could deploy their projects in as rapid a way as possible. So we contributed to that and case studies to that rapid mobilisation playbook, and we're obviously looking to abide by the principles of it as we procure our projects now. We also contributed to the Crown Infrastructure Partners and Infracom shovel-ready projects, which were announced by the government. We have a number of projects which are in the shovel-ready projects, but we also have a much broader program and portfolio of projects which we've been taking to market as well. We have had a little bit of supplier criticism, which has mainly been around our traditional delivery models and that we're too reactive. So we've been working hard on a number of initiatives to get ahead of our planning curve and to proactively work with our suppliers around opportunity available through our projects at the Ministry, and also looking to challenge our typically traditional delivery model and look at alternate delivery models which look at more collaborative ways of working, models such as early contractor involvement. We're using that already on a number of projects across our portfolio. So just to cover all of that off is a massive opportunity for us at the moment, and we're looking to change the way that we manage and organise our projects. We're looking to change the way that we arrange our market engagement, and then we're looking at changing the way that we procure to suit the support of achieving the best outcome for the project that we're taking to market. But what we also need is the sector to step up and join us on that journey. So it's really big opportunity for both ourselves to change, but we need the sector to join us on the journey to help us achieve some of the goals we're looking for. Okay, just my final slide, please. So just looking to the future, and this has come through a number of conversations with our key suppliers over the COVID-19 period, is that what we're trying to do is seeking to move away from our traditional long lead time procurement approaches, have more, I suppose, customized or appropriate approaches to procurement that suits the requirements of the project or the program of work. We're exploring more collaborative contracts and delivery models. We want to make use of guidance that's already available. I talked about the rapid mobilisation playbook. There's other guidance as well that was made available through the COVID period. But one of the documents that clearly stands out for me still is the NZTA procurement manual and the guidance that's still offered in that document. Any occasional client that's listening to this call, please pick that up and use it, because it will be invaluable to you. Obviously, I've talked about risk sharing and looking at shared risk models. Really important for what we're trying to achieve. Risk needs to be allocated to the best place it can be managed. If we push this all to our suppliers, we'll end up paying for it in the long run anyway. It will be priced into the tender price. One thing that's really important for us at the Ministry is that we've got a number of supplier agreements and panels that have been set up, so organisations that have been through a procurement process with us already. We don't use those as productively and efficiently as we could do. So I think that's one thing that we are looking at in our future planning, is a more productive and efficient use of those existing supplier arrangements, and looking to engage our suppliers in a more proactive manner to assist do that. I talked about unmodified contract forms earlier. Again, that's avoiding bespoke T's and C's and all the unproductive time, cost, and effort that goes with creating bespoke T's and C's. We're moving much more towards negotiation, open book, looking to potentially agree off-site overhead and margin with our key suppliers. But again, this is a new environment for the ministry, and it will be most likely a new environment for our suppliers working with the ministry. So it will take time to develop the capability, both within our organisation and with our suppliers, and to work together on that journey. One thing that I have to highlight is an absolute key for us is the publication of our forward work programme. If we can't articulate the opportunity that we have to the market, then it's going to be very, very difficult for us to do our job. We're always going to be reacting and not planning our forward work. So it always has to start for me at the publication of forward work and making it visible to our key suppliers and the market. One thing that we are moving towards is, especially where we've got existing supplier arrangements in place, is incentivization via key performance indicators. We've been working on a performance and measurement and benchmarking system, and our intention is that we incentivize our key suppliers through the use of KPIs. That would be in the case of rewarding good performance with the opportunity to win more work. One of the other things that we could potentially look at, and this has come from the sector, is like in an alliance type contract, you could potentially look at ring fencing part of the capital budget to reward the contractor for good performance on agreed KPIs through the delivery of a project. Something we're not doing here yet, but some food for thought. And finally, from me, we need our suppliers to be on the journey with us. You can't go on a transition journey and move from a sort of transactional reactive procurement, which with long lead times and a reasonably traditional process, to something that's more proactive, driven around collaboration, looking at standard forms of contract, different types of pricing methods where you're moving away from just straight price competition into a much more negotiated environment. We can't do that alone, and we need our suppliers to come on that journey with us. So that will be my final message for today, is how we work with our suppliers is going to be key to our future success. We need to listen to our suppliers around the opportunities that we present to them. Are there things that we're missing? Could it be organised in a different way? And then informing that and using that feedback and advice and guidance and utilise that in our procurement planning, and to drive a different way of working for both ourselves in the delivery of our significant programme of work, which I showed you earlier, and also working with our suppliers as we deliver that programme as well. So thank you, AD. I'll pass back to you and switch a few things off.
Thank you, Peter, for sharing your insights, the changes made, lessons learned pre, during, and post-COVID. A wealth of knowledge there and exciting new practical tools, which surely could be applied in the ever-changing climate of the construction market. Please welcome our second speaker for today, Benoit Midol. He has a proven record with large building projects and the infrastructure sector in New Zealand. He is a natural leader who develops large and high-performing teams, personally and commercially astute, and readily identifies business opportunities to create quality industry relationships. Benoit Midul joins us as the General Manager of Downer New Zealand. So I will now hand over to Benoit. Thank you.
Good afternoon, and many thanks for the introduction, AD. That's appreciated, and good to be following on from Peter. That's great. I don't have a presentation, so I'll just try and be myself. So I'm coming with a strange accent, coming from France, and as AD said, I spent 15 years in the industry, mostly in the building sector, both in France and in the UK. And arrived 5 years ago in New Zealand. So today I look after the order book of the infrastructure project business unit of Downer New Zealand. So that's the business unit that does bridges, tunnels, streetscape, water sector, and so on. So I look after a team of roughly 40 people. That's and an order book of roughly 500 million per annum. So a bit of work on our hands at the moment. So sticking to the brief, I'm going to talk about the COVID experience. So I'm going to try and describe what happened during the lockdown that New Zealand faced, what after lockdown, what we're seeing now, and how I see the future, and take some learnings and lessons. So the first element is around during the lockdown, and I think the New Zealand lockdown, I can't exactly, I think it was 11 weeks. Extreme busyness is what I could say. I can't remember what was a weekend from what was a weekday. It was extremely busy, and this was led from a combination of factors. The first of all being that the New Zealand has a shortage of infrastructure at the moment, and the government had injected prior to COVID a lot of money in order to catch up on this infrastructure shortage. And the government chose, which was the right call, to proceed with all of the projects that they had planned during the lockdown. So to give you a bit of an idea, during any given year in my remit, we do tender 4 billion worth of New Zealand dollar worth of work. And in the 9 weeks following the lockdown, we have tendered 1.8 billion. So roughly in 9 weeks, we did half of what we do generally in a year. So extremely busy. Our local authorities, client also kept on business as usual because they saw themselves as a mandate to keep the economy going, which was I think a great thing, and we're very thankful for that. So high tendering activity during the lockdown. And one of the lessons is that we've adapted very well as an industry, both client, designers, private sector, contractors. Some tenders, and I'm thinking here of, for example, KiwiRail on Papakura to Pukekohe, which even though Downer ended up losing the tender has been done during the lockdown completely in an interactive setup with Zoom meetings and so on. And the procurement was very well run and enabled a clean-cut decision-making. So it's good to see from the construction and infrastructure industry, which is quite often deemed as being a bit old-fashioned, to see that we adapted very well to this change of conditions. So it's a good point. The other point is that quite quickly when the lockdown started, obviously it was clear that it was going to have an economic impact. And very quickly the government decided to launch this shovel-ready incentive, which Peter talked about a bit earlier, which was around basically trying to stimulate the economy once we would be after lockdown by generating stimulus package and accelerating some projects and programs of work. So I can't look at it with hindsight. I can't remember how many hours we've spent doing some list of projects, the way that we could go faster about them and how we would go about it. We've done some unsolicited proposal. There was a heap of work going into let's try and stimulate the economy post lockdown. So extreme busyness there as well. And lastly, maintaining relationship. It was a stressful period. We were obviously, as contractors, bleeding money, and as the government stepped up to the rescue, but we need to keep this contact going. And therefore, our procurement and business development skills, we made a very concerted effort to stay in touch with our client, keep them abreast of what was happening, of where our commercial discussions, our impacts, and so on. So that's kept a lot of time. And I guess to wrap up what happened during this lockdown period, what it realized is a a very strong incentive on well-being. We had some people that burnt out. There's no other word for this. With the pressure of job security, of being stuck at home with young families, and this extra workload that I've just gone through was quite a difficult period for the industry and for us, and I'm sure for everyone. So now we finished this lockdown. We're in the aftermath of this, and as Peter mentioned, 100 days in New Zealand without community transmission. So we're pretty much back as business as usual. And what's happening now in our market? So the first element is that the pricing and commercial COVID entitlements are still being a bit discussed because COVID is no longer unforeseen. And I've seen a question around force majeure, and obviously now COVID is something which can be foreseen. And back to Peter's comments around the risk and where does it sit, it triggers some discussion. So as an example, we've got a by default position that some clients have accepted, others haven't. There's some guidelines from the industry, but it's being discussed and it's still on a case-by-case basis. And to give you an example of how difficult it is, we've done some productivity measurement when we came back to level 3, which is the highest level at which we can operate. Some projects were working at a productivity rate of only 20%, when others were working at a productivity rate at 110%. And if you take a project which is in a confined space with a lot of labor requirement and a lot of social interaction, these projects were highly impacted by the COVID health and safety measures. When projects which had more of a clean run and less traffic impediment or less stakeholder impediment managed to achieve productivity gains. So it's difficult to have a one-size-fits-all with regards to what is the impact of COVID moving forward if we were going to other levels of security. So that's one of the lessons, this commercial element. The other lesson is that, unfortunately, the frenzy that I was mentioning earlier around the shovel-ready stream has a bit waned. And whilst the government is still committed to deliver a stimulus economic package through putting some money into the economy, there's 3 billion that have been earmarked for this. The release of those projects and package has been quite slow, and it's impacting at the moment the economy. And I'll just give you, for example, one statistic. In the 10 weeks following the lockdown, with our business unit, we've tendered 11 projects, whereas in the 10 weeks before the lockdown, we had tendered 34 projects. So roughly a very strong reduction of the tendering activity and of the procurement activity, which is mainly led through local authorities having uncertainty about their budget and waiting for the government to give them funding. So this has created a bit of an issue. We've got some projects that, some people that have finished some projects now and that have no projects to go to. And it's going to get a bit worse in the months to come, where we have major projects like America's Cup in Auckland, or downtown infrastructure in Auckland, or Christchurch Southern Motorway in Christchurch, which will all complete and free a lot of people, which for the moment we don't necessarily have projects to go with. So we need this stimulus package to come. And while the government still has quite a strong investment for big structural projects like Kiwi Rail projects or like Amity Eastern Busway for Auckland Transport, these projects tend to be in a design phase, so not generating immediately some employment opportunities and so on. And therefore, there's a bit of a concern in the middle term now around what can we do with our people. And we'll see a bit how it plays out. So moving moving ahead and in the future, as I said, we have tendered 11 projects recently, and roughly in our market, for an entity like ours, we're roughly 40% of hit rate. So that means that we tend to win 4 out of 10 tenders we go for. And in the recent 10 weeks, our hit rate has been halved. So we're at half of it. And this is due to the fact that what's happening to Downer is happening to the industry. And we are finding ourselves at the moment competing with companies that want to retain their staff, want to keep going, and that are therefore more eager to get the work and somehow to buy the work. And that's a bit of a, if I look forward, a bit of a concern for me is that we will enter into the next 6 months into a very competitive phase where it's, if as a procurement entity we are not careful as an industry, we could generate this race to the bottom, which in the long run, as Peter mentioned, is not helping the industry. And so get this, and when I say not helping the industry, is because when you buy lowest price, there are a few things that don't come with it. And I'm thinking, for example, that some of the initiatives that Peter was talking about in the construction sector accord are touching around sustainable procurement. And I'm thinking here of achieving social outcomes through the way we procure, achieving local supply, implementing training programs or implementing programs to assist people that are being left out of other impacted economic sector. All of those things, if we go race to the bottom, will not be implemented. And therefore, that's a bit of a concern in the next months that I have. But moving a bit further, first of all, I've got a bit more optimism. And this is due to the fact that our national clients, and Peter just was an embodiment of this, but KiwiRail is of the same vein, NZEA is of the same vein, are abiding by the construction sector accord principles around risk sharing, around collaboration, and around these sustainable procurement initiatives. And as a proof, since lockdown has been released, we've seen 2 major entities, which are Auckland Transport and KiwiRail, going through an alliancing mode of procurement, which none of these organizations had done before. So they followed through other organizations like Auckland Council or Auckland Airport or NZEA that were doing alliances. And even with the new world we're living in, these landmark clients are still abiding with the construction accord principles, which is great to see. The industry is also putting in place a few good things. I think about initiatives around, as I said, training initiatives to recycle people coming from other industries like the tourism industry, which has been heavily impacted. Also around the subcontractor pre-qualification, and there's some work done around aligning subcontractor pre-qualification so that the tier 2 and tier 3 SME network can get some pre-qualification and work faster. Last element, Peter mentioned it in his presentation. It's around the program approach. We see that happening, and we welcome it as a tier 1 contractor. MOE is an example. We've seen that with NZEA, who's trying to implement this at both a local level and national level, and reinventing themselves, which is to their credit. Watercare has done it recently in Auckland around the enterprise model, inspired from the UK. And we are talking to some energy providers at the moment who are thinking around the same thing. So there again, moving forward, a bit of a concern in the short term around retaining capacity, retaining our people because of this race to the bottom thing. But overall, the principles of the construction sector accord, I think, will prevail. And if I can finish on an optimistic note, I think the forces in New Zealand that made New Zealand infrastructure sector growing which is a shortage of infrastructure, a shortage of housing, and also a very welcoming place. These forces are still around, and they will materialize, and they will even amplify after COVID, because I think New Zealand is even a more attractive place in the world after COVID than it was before, and therefore I see, hopefully, I hope that we can grow the country, and I'm sure that as an industry, private sector, public sector, and the procurement community can help achieving these goals. I think that's pretty much it for me. If that's okay.
Thank you, Benoit. I'd like to say first and foremost, yes, thank you again, Benoit, for sharing your sector industry point of view. It helps to provide perspective and a lens on the other side of the coin. So now we will get straight into questions and the roundtable discussion for both our speakers, Peter and Benoit, which I'd like to invite both of you back on screen for. First question we have is for Peter. Do your contracts have extensive force majeure clauses? First part. And were there any delivery delays, and how did the ministry deal with the force majeure requests?
We do have force majeure in our contracts. I'd have to go back to our legal team to see how we managed that through the COVID environment. I think that, as Benoit suggested earlier, that has changed over time as we've come out of our lockdown environment. So what we did do is take a reasonably proactive stance around how we would treat variations through the COVID-19 alert level 4 lockdown. So just for those that are outside of New Zealand, we have 4 alert levels in New Zealand, with 4 being the highest alert level where we had a full lockdown. So we instigated these policies when we went into full lockdown around how we would manage our projects that were live at the time, and we did that through a variations process. So we recognised that for the health of the industry that we had to take a proactive stance around variations during that alert level 4 lockdown. And what was the second part of the question? Sorry, about delays, was it?
Yes. So it was, were there any delivery delays regarding the force, obviously the COVID? I think you've already touched on it in your presentation.
I think there's been delays across the board. I mean, I had to wait several months for Liverpool to lift the English Premier League title as a result of COVID-19. So it's it has created delays for our projects, but we're dealing with it with our suppliers in a pragmatic way.
Thank you, Peter. One for Benoit. Have you done any intense scenario planning? For example, if we ended back up in lockdown, surely that work intensity can't continue for long periods. So I guess, is there any contingency planning regarding if we were to go back into lockdown for Downer?
Yeah, that's a difficult question, because having no case of community transmission recently, we're hoping not to get there, obviously. So yeah, we've done some analysis, and I guess for us, first of all, the intensity work we had, the extreme busyness I was referring to, is something that I feel would be a bit calmer for several reasons. The first one is that the shovel-ready stream we've gone through this phase now, and I think the excitement that it generated and the work intensity it generated will not be there anymore. So that's one element. The second one is that most of the things we've gone through, how do you compensate the wage subsidy, etc., have been proved and tested, and therefore will come quicker to resolution. So I'm confident that the work intensity will be easier from that point of view. Then after, for I guess from what as an industry would be advocating quite firmly, I think, is to have a very strong move from level 4 to level 3, because we think that the level 3 restrictions have achieved no once again community transmission. We've managed to keep our sites safe, our people with social distancing and so on, whilst keeping the economy going and keeping our people gainfully employed. And I think we are not a level 4, an extended level 4 lockdown would be disastrous for us, and therefore we would lobby quite hard to get quite quickly into level 3. I don't know if that answers the question.
No, that's perfect. Thank you, Benoit. Next one is for Peter. How do you ensure value for money and competition is managed in the early contract involvement model?
Oh, that's a good question. So we're just going through a couple of these at the moment. So typically what we do is we break down an ECI typically into 2 stages. So 2 stages of procurement. The ECI design stage and then the construction phase of the project. So what we would look to do is either utilize our construction directory, which is our panel, or we would go out to the open market for an ECI contractor. There are options for us, obviously, within that ECI environment as to whether we would go for a more kind of ministry-led or ministry-controlled design type process, where we could enter into a contract with a lead designer and a contractor, but directly contracting with us, or some form of novation of the consultant to the contractor. Or the other end of the spectrum is to go for a more contractor-led approach with a consortium provided by the contractor. So we would go through a formal procurement process, typically on non-price attributes, because those are the key sort of behaviours that we're looking to see through that collaborative contracting environment. It's really more important about how a contractor can work with us through that ECI process. Key for us. Obviously, price is an important part of that, but it's not something that we would typically evaluate. We would look at some form of negotiation once we got to a preferred following the evaluation process had been completed. Once we go through that ECI design process, we'd have agreed KPIs in place. So we'd constantly be monitoring the performance of the ECI contractor and how they are working with our designer or their design team, and working towards the desired outcome for the project. Obviously, a key aspect of the ministry's work is working collaboratively with the schools and dealing with quite a complex stakeholder environment. And then of course the conclusion to that ECI stage 1 process is the provision of a tender price for the construction phase. And what we would do there, and this is really to answer your question, is that we would expect that that our ECI contractor would work in a good degree of collaboration with our independent quantity surveyor in the provision of building up a price. So what we would look to do is for our independent QS to build up their cost estimate for the project based on the design that's been agreed, whilst the contractor is continuing to do that in terms of building up a tender price. But what we would expect to see there, we'd set some ground rules around that. And I think what we'd expect to see from our contractors, as they're getting prices coming back, pricing packages coming back from the market, we'd expect those to be shared with our QS. And then when there's a price, there'd be a price exchange once those prices have been established, the tender price and our QS estimate. And then we'd expect there to be a negotiation on that price as we, if there's a significant difference between the two, and there could be differences therein just in terms of methodologies or the understanding of the QS of what the contractor's price for or what have you. So it could be simple things that just come out, and then more complex things that need to be negotiated. So the role of our independent QS and the willingness of our ECI contractor to act appropriately in that collaborative environment is absolutely key.
Perfect, thank you, Peter. The next question we have is for Benoit. What measures were taken by the construction sector to motivate workers during the lockdown?
Well,
from the perspective of Downer, obviously.
Yeah. Trying to think. The first one is, I think it's coming from the top, is explaining that we were all in the same boat, but some of us managed to get gainfully employed during the whole period. And I've mentioned that on a personal side and the team I work with, we were all 110% gainfully employed, but also acknowledging that some other people that are more tradespeople or boots on the ground could not go out and do their work and therefore receive and be gainfully employed. And so what the construction and Downer did, I think, very well, is to explain this to everyone and explain that some of the people gainfully employed were working for the benefit or in the same boat than people that could not do their work. And as a consequence, the treatment we took was that everybody was treated the same. So we took a salary cut to diminish the impact of COVID and of obviously the money that was going out. And when you take the salary cut, the wage subsidy, it enabled us to weather the storm. I think the company did a great job at explaining it. I need also to say that the salary cut was also some part of it were reimbursed post-COVID by our company, which is a great thing that was unexpected and great thing to have. And I guess if I look at Downer, everybody was talking and we knew what was happening in the market, and we knew how some of our competitors or other sectors were treating their workforce. And we took the view that treating our workforce fairly, as I've just explained, and nicely, would make us an employer of choice, which would then, when the lockdown would finish and restart, would make us a good ability to retain our people and also to attract other people. So that's how we've looked at it.
Perfect, thank you, Benoit. Obviously, there's a lot of questions coming through now, so any ones that we don't get to, we will try to answer them and then post them after the webinar is finished. For both speakers, please could you say something around the changes you have made or planning to when managing suppliers after a contract has been signed, especially maybe how you manage the smaller sized suppliers compared to the larger ones. Peter, we'll start with you.
Sorry, I'm just just clarification on the question. Is it post-contract, or there are opportunities that we look to create for small and medium-sized companies?
It's post-contract, so after the contract has been signed.
Okay. I mean, once a contract is a contract at the end of the day, so I don't see there being any major differences or significant differences between how we would manage a contract, either whether it's a large supplier or a relatively small supplier. I think in that post-COVID environment, we were extremely flexible in terms of whether it was a large supplier or a small supplier. We applied the same principles. We didn't change the way that we operated.
Thank you, Peter. Benoit, in terms of your subcontractors, I guess, from that perspective?
Yeah, once the contract signed, I'm with Peter. What I would say is that we are much more careful on how we go about things. So number one is we see our tier one contractor remit or duty to maintain a strong tier two SME market And we've recently won a project with KiwiRail on this premise, with explaining how we would use a strong subcontractor base to basically make sure that we would retain this capacity within the industry. So we're much more intentional about it than we were pre-COVID. And the other element to answer the question is around management. We are monitoring exposure much more than what we were before. And taking the example of KiwiRail I mentioned, we, for example, capped our exposure to one of the key subcontractors, but we told them, look, we are not going to give you more than X per year on this project. It's not going to happen because we don't want to tip you over. And the other element is that we are much more hands-on around the way we manage them. I don't mean commercially, I mean on the ground, so that we retain this ability to step in or to see the potential risks associated with those contractors. I think it answers. And at the end of the day, as Peter said, once a contract signed, we play with the contract anyway. So that's the reality.
Perfect. Thank you, Benoit. I'd like to now invite our speakers for any closing remarks. Benoit, any closing remarks? Peter?
No, quite good. Just one thing that I think I maybe should have said in my presentation and around procurement is that the earlier we invite the industry to the budget setting or to the planning and budget setting, the better, and which goes into the way of collaboration. We are experiencing on certain projects at the moment some delays, which are all created, I think, because of late involvement of an independent estimator or late involvement of designer or contractor. So the earlier, the better, because then you can map out the next steps and de-risk them. I guess that's one thing. And for the rest, just reiterating my short-term concern during the next year and my long-term optimism about the industry in New Zealand.
Thank you, Benoit. Peter?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm not going to sort of repeat what I've said earlier, but one thing I would say about for other CIPS members around the world who are currently still in the middle of the challenges that COVID presents, hopefully from what Benoit and I have had to say today, you'll take some positives really out of some of the work that we were able to continue to do whilst we were in lockdown ourselves, both in terms of progressing procurements that were in flight, the way that we use technology to do interactives, as Benoit has said that he was involved in. We use technology to continue with briefings, negotiations, then moving out of that environment and into how to deal with contracts that you've got in place already, just to be, I think the big thing from our perspective was that, we want a healthy industry. We want a healthy supply market. When all this is done and dusted, we're still going to have projects to deliver. And what we can't afford is for that supply market to get constrained. So you have to think smarter around how you manage your way through these difficult times, and think laterally, but think positively and what's to come rather than the current situation of being in the now.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks,
I'll
Adi.
hand over to Sharon to close it off. Thank you.
Thank you, Adi. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Benoit. Fantastic session today. Really informative. I'm sure everybody agreed, so thank you. We have lots more. Just like today, we have more activities coming up for August. So first of all, as I mentioned at the top of the session, we have the Auckland Branch Networking event. That's on tonight, folks. So for those that are in Auckland and can be together face-to-face, the Auckland Committee have their monthly networking event at the Brit Pub and Eatery. That's from 6 p.m. tonight, so make sure you're there. The next major event for us is Women Leaders in Procurement. Now, this is on the 19th of August, and this is going to be a series. So that's happening at 12 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time and 2 p.m. in New Zealand. And it's going to be a series. The first one is the past, the present, and the future. So come and join me in a conversation with 4 procurement leaders, and we'll be discussing imperative issues of that topic, past, present, and future, concerning women leaders in procurement. Now, that's open to everyone, so we also welcome blokes and women in attending that. The more that we know about the future direction in gender in procurement, the better for everybody. Also, we've got another event happening all the way over in the west of Australia, WA local event, a government case study. Now, this one is on the 26th of August, and it's called the Western Outlook. 12 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time and 2 p.m. in New Zealand, and the webinar will showcase examples of highly effective procurement projects within the WA local government sector. So make sure you don't miss that one as well. Please join us to see all events that are coming up on our website, or follow us on the Australia and New Zealand LinkedIn page. I really hope you've enjoyed today as much as I have. A copy of this webinar will be available next week, and we'll also get to some of those unanswered questions. So thanks for your attendance today. Keep safe, and we'll see you at the next webinar. Bye.